Oh my gosh, we are so excited for tonight's event. I get the honor to be in conversation with Jenny, and I get to introduce her, which is even better. So Jenny Elder Moke made her literary debut during a pandemic in 2020 with her novel Hood, which was a reimagining of the Robin Hood story, and it was a JLG selection, a Mayor's Book Club selection, and received lots of critical acclaim. So there's Hood, I love it. But tonight she's here to introduce her new series featuring the bookish Samantha Knox. She's Indiana Jones type of character with the curse of the Specter Queen. So welcome, 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 Jenny. We're so excited that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
And I said earlier that I totally, positively have poster envy. That poster is absolutely amazing.
Gorgeous poster.
I just love it. So introduce us to Samantha.
Yes, so Curse of the Specter Queen, as you said, is a Samantha Knox novel. So she's our protagonist. And when we meet her at the start of the book, she's working in an antique bookshop in a small town in Illinois in 1925. And she's had dreams of being an archaeologist and going to school, but she's kind of shelved those dreams because her father died during World War I. And that really sort of made her afraid of the world. And she kind of tucked herself away and thought, okay, I can be content with this. But as we all know, no book ever begins. No book ever ends where it begins. And so one day she gets a mysterious package at her bookshop with a book in it that has a coded letter. And she soon learns that she's not the only one interested in the book when her shop is broken into and the book gets stolen, and it sends her off on this journey to Dublin during the 1920s to try and track down an ancient relic that can supposedly bring about the end of the world before it falls into the wrong hands.
So now it's part, for me, it was part like historical, it was Agatha Christie, then you start with the Indiana Jones and the solving of like little puzzles and all of the action. Did you start off like, was it like a whole story?
Well, I think the best thing that you can know about me is that The Mummy was my favorite movie. It's still my favorite movie to this day. It's a perfect film, and no one can ever convince me otherwise. But like Indiana Jones, The Mummy, I love National Treasure. Those are all movies that I adore, that I grew up adoring, that I saw, that always kind of spoke to me. And so I think that I ended up just sort of taking all of those and then like mashing them up in my brain. And this was like my attempt at adding something to the canon. So looking at it now, it's a very packed book. There's a lot to it. It is a historical, so all of the historical elements to it, the Roaring Twenties, the Celtic mythology that it's based around, there's a whole treasure hunt set piece that takes place in medieval Dublin. All of that stuff is as true and as accurate as I could possibly make it. And that was really important to me. I did the same thing for Hood. Hood was set in a true historical time. And so I really love that idea of taking a story, but then trying to fit it into the historical context. And so that's kind of, Curse of the Specter Queen ended up that same way, where I knew that I wanted to tell this sort of Indiana Jones, The Mummy type story, but I wanted it to fit into a real historical context.
Well, so you did. So you answered one of my questions. So everything is true. So
up to a point. Then it gets a little, like really untrue.
But it was just, it was so much fun. And the one thing that I kept thinking, it was almost like when the book was going across, the ocean, I truly felt like I was on that ship. And then
And that's a real ship. That was the RMS Olympic was the sister ship to the Titanic.
which and one of my favorite lines in the book, and I can't remember it exactly, but when all the characters were talking about, well, you know, the Titanic sank, you know, and it's like, oh, but that was, you know, that 10 years ago, you know.
That was like a decade ago. The RMS Olympic was an interesting ship too, because it actually was a warship during World War I. So like the Titanic obviously went out on its maiden voyage and, but you know, snapped like a twig. But the RMS Olympic, it was a luxury liner, and then it got sort of conscripted into service during World War I, and it got hit by a torpedo at one point, and it cracked the hull, and they had to repair it. But it was in service until like the 1930s, I think the late 1930s, and then it was dismantled. So she was a hardy ship. Like she outlasted, like the Titanic gets all the praise, but I feel like more people should talk about the Olympic.
No, I'm going to talk about it more because I loved it, and it was just something I didn't know. So there's a few other characters in the book. So can you introduce us?
Yes, so Samantha, in a true action adventure lore, you can't ever go on a journey by yourself. That's never how it happens. So Samantha is accompanied by her best friend, Joanna Steeling, who is the daughter of a textile baron and a former socialite, or former actress turned socialite, and her brother as well, Bennett Steeling, who Sam has a childhood crush on. But he's back from college, and it's actually the book that the mysterious package with the book in it that gets sent to her shop gets sent from one of his professors who's supposed to be in Ireland. And so that's how they kind of all get embroiled in this together.
So did you have it all plotted out, planned? Like, did you know the ending? Did you know?
I think I'm a big plotter. So especially for like these kinds of stories that have so many moving parts, it's really difficult to try and like sit down and figure that out on the fly. I mean, I guess people could, but there's, you know, you really have to like structure things because everything that pays off, you have to go set it up. And so I do try to, there was like one point I had like a whiteboard and another, I had like 3 whiteboards going around me of just like trying to track different timelines of who was doing what and where and when did they intersect and how did that set up the story when we're going to get to it. So this one the plotting on this one got really in the weeds to the point that I was like, can I just turn in an outline? Can I just turn in this really detailed outline instead of the story itself?
Well, now, were the characters developed, or were they all in your mind the way they are? Because the 3 of them, the 3 main, are so different. But like Joanna is so much fun, you know, and Sam is, I think she's fun, but she was struggling with a lot of things. And Bennett is just like that older brother you just want to strangle.
You don't know if you want to strangle him or if you want to make out with him.
Yeah, it's definitely yes.
Yeah, I think character work is always that always takes the most time for me, because I usually come at most stories from the plot, like from the story itself, and then I have to figure out, okay, who are these characters that are walking through this story, and how do I make them the best characters for us to follow through? And so they're the ones that I always have to kind of, I can't know them until we've gone through like the first draft. And I just know that now. I know that I've got to come at it from story, and then I will figure out the characters as I go. And as I ask more questions of like, what would they do in these situations? How would they react? And I think a lot of like the dynamic of Sam and Joe and Bennett is how they interact with each other. So I learned a lot about each one of them individually by putting them together as a team. And I really didn't understand why they all were attracted to each other until I put them together as a team, and I realized, oh, they're each necessary for this trio to work. Like Joanna is kind of, she's the grit. She's the one who's like, I'll get it done no matter how it needs to get done, even if I have to like steal it from someone. And then, you know, Bennett's really like the brain. He's the knowledge bank. Anytime they need to just casually know something that no one would just casually know, Bennett always just happens to casually know it. And then Sam is really, I think, like the heart. She's the driving force. And I think she helps give the stealing siblings purpose and make them feel purposeful and get them out of their own heads. And so I think the three of them together was really how I learned who they were individually.
So now, was there a character that just surprised you, that just kind of entered into the picture, that it's like, oh, you know?
I think, so the two characters who went through the most changes in every single draft were Philip and Alistair, are two characters who come along later on in the story, and they join for their own reasons. They're both there for their own reasons. And they were both, like from draft to draft, they were both entirely different characters, because I just didn't know. I knew that I wanted them there, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with them once they were there. And like there are some drafts where like they swapped roles, or they swapped personality types, or they swap backgrounds and things like that. And so I think those were the two that once I figured out who they were and why they were there, I was like, oh, okay, now I know. Like my brain knew. I didn't. I had to catch up. My brain was like, no, you're going to need these guys for strategic reasons. I was like, okay, I'm going to trust you.
See, now I'm going to really, we had, before everybody came on, I told Jenny that I absolutely loved her Twitter, and, you know, and she was saying that it's just her brain talking. See, so I want to be in the same room with you when you are like writing all of this, because you had to be all over the place because you cover so much.
Yeah.
How did you do it? How did you pull it all together so beautifully? Because you put the puzzle together, and there was a lot going on, but you did it beautifully. So how did you do that is the question.
I think, so what I really like that stories do, and this is always my goal as a writer, and hopefully what I end up pulling off, particularly in stories like this where there are so many moving parts, and at some point you'll go like, there's so many things happening, I don't know how they're all going to come together. And that's fair, because that's often a point that I hit when I'm planning them. But what I really like in story is when everything matters to everything else. Like, not like things don't just come out of the blue and it's like suddenly like, oh, this guy that we needed help from just happens to be in the next town over, or whatever it may be. I really like the idea that every time you have something that's essential to the story, that you've already planted that seed somewhere back behind, like back in the story. And so I really try to, rather than like, usually I'll get my characters to a point, I'm like, okay, they're stuck in a corner. How do I get them out of this corner? And I'll go back and look at everything that I've done in the story before. And I said, what's a thread that I can pull out from like anything that's happened before that I can then use to sew this next scene back into the story? And that's really my approach, because I think those are the most satisfying things when you read and you're like, oh, yes, I didn't know that was gonna matter. I didn't know that was like, oh, I remember reading that, and just, you forget. But then when they bring it up, you're like, that did happen. They did see that, and now it's mattering. And so I try to I like that in a story. And so I try to always have those threads in the stories that I write too.
Well, Curse of the Specter Queen has that. You did it like amazingly. I was like reading through it and I'm like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So it's just, I just love it. So what's your favorite scene that you wrote with Sam in it? Like her favorite scene alone?
That's a good question. Let me think about Sam alone. I think that anytime Sam is putting the pieces together to solve a puzzle, there's always that. What I really love about writing those scenes is that that's kind of how writing itself works. When you're dealing with a lot of clues and you don't yet know how they all fit together, but you know that they can and will and should. And so you just sort of sit with them for a long time and you push them around on the table and you move them around in your brain and you tack them up on the wall and you go, okay, I know all of these things need to come together and I don't know how they're going to yet. And then that moment when you figure it out and your brain clicks and goes, I know how this is going to work. I know what the answer is. That's like, there's nothing more satisfying than that for me as a writer, when I figure out how everything's going to go together. And so I think those scenes, there are a couple of those scenes with Sam where she's noodling a puzzle. And when she, you're like staring out the window, just thinking, how am I going to solve this? And there's a bird lands on a branch and you're like, oh, that's what it is. And it feels so trite when you're writing it, but that's what it feels like. It's just some little random detail that just unlocks all the secrets of the universe in your brain. And then you're just like, I know the answer. I know what it is. I know who did it.
So now, was there a difficult scene to write with her?
There's a very emotional scene between Sam and Joanna, because at the start of the book, Sam and Joanna are sort of estranged. They're childhood best friends, but Joanna has gone off to the sort of specialized college academy type thing, and she wanted Sam to go with her, and Sam said no. And so they sort of had a falling out about it, and she hasn't talked to Joanna in like 6 months, and she's worried their friendship is over. And so they have this scene towards the end of the book where Joanna really emotionally reckons with Sam about what's happened to their friendship and why. And that scene, I didn't get there until like a couple of drafts in, because I knew that there was tension there and I didn't know how to get at the heart of it. But once that scene came out, it really surprised me, because it's not a scene that I think that you see a lot in these kinds of stories, these like action adventure stories. They're usually moving so quickly, nobody stops to have feelings about anything. And so getting them to stop and have this emotional reckoning, but also like letting both of them be right and wrong, letting both of them be hurt and not picking a winner, or not saying, Sam was right and Joanna's being unfair, or Joe was right and Sam was being unfair. Just sort of letting them work that out. That scene was, I think, emotionally taxing for me to figure that out between them. But it ultimately, I feel like, paid off, knowing, like, letting them have that moment together.
So what's your favorite scene with all of them? What's your favorite scene from the whole book?
So my favorite series of scenes, it doesn't include all three of them, but my favorite scene that takes place over several chapters is this big treasure hunt piece where Sam finally figures out, so there's this relic that has been hidden, and they need to find it before the bad guys do, or they'll use it to end the world. And so once she finally figures out what the clue path is for finding this thing, that was something that didn't come in until like later drafts. And when I had the idea, I was like, no, that's like too National Treasure, which I adore. But it was like, no, like there's no way my editor will go for that. There's no way it's going to be believable. And I just thought, I was like, look, if this is something that I would want to read, then I should write it because someone else is going to want to read it too. But I mean, I got to go down a total rabbit hole on all of these incredible, like, medieval places in Dublin, and really trying to connect all of that. Was like my Sam level puzzle. It was like, okay, I know I have these clues that tie to this thing, that tie to these places, and how do I make all of those work, and how do I make them tie to real places that really existed at that time? And that was like everybody's got that like murder board moment, you know, where you've just got everything up and all of the strings are attached and you're just like, I can do it. I know it. I figured it out. That was my like murder board moment where it's like, I think I can do this.
Oh, I love it. Are you a little bit like Sam?
I am like Sam in the sense that I love a good mystery. And I don't mean a mystery of like a whodunit, although those are fun, but just the mystery of something that we just don't know the answer to. So like for her, archaeology, and for us even today, archaeology is a lot of that. There's still so much that we don't know, so much we don't understand. There are still so many languages that we've never deciphered because they're closed systems. They're like, that's, a lot of people don't know this about hieroglyphics, but you know, the only reason we were able to translate hieroglyphics was because of the Rosetta Stone. And that was, you know, so I did a lot of reading on that. There, like Ogham is a very interesting language. That's this language.
Yes, I was going to ask that next.
Yeah, and that's the Celtic tree language is what some people call it, but it's also, I think, more formally known as Ogham. And it was a really fascinating language because the Celtic people, the Druids, they had no written language. Their power was in being their oral history. And that was how you became a Druid, was that you just learned their oral history for 20 years, and then maybe they'd let you be a Druid. And so they had no form of written language. But when the Romans came in, they needed a way to sort of secretly communicate with each other, to identify, I think that most of what exists now identified land borders or were markers for like really well-known people. But there are these standing stones that are all over Ireland. There are a few in Wales and England, and they're marked with Ogham, which was this, you know, sort of crude written language that was meant to be communicated in ancient Irish, so that the Romans couldn't read it. So like that kind of stuff where it's just secrets that are out there in the world, and secrets that are secrets because everybody who knew the truth is gone. Those are super fascinating to me, and I think that's really why Sam is so attracted to archaeology as well, because especially in her time in the 1920s, everything was a secret. They didn't know, they knew hardly, and most of what they knew was wrong.
So now how did you do? So you wrote the book during the pandemic.
This one I didn't. The second one I did.
The second one you did. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
But how did you do all the research?
Most of it, it's a combination. I think at one point I had posted a picture on Instagram of all of the books that I had bought or read or borrowed, and it was like this tall. And so it was a lot of finding books. I mean, I'd go to like resale bookshops, and I would look for sort of older books that I could sort of track to that same time period. So the interesting thing about writing historicals is that you have to know the history as they knew it, and sometimes that's like a different track than what we know today. And so you can have these sort of anachronistic things that we know now that they didn't know then. But a hugely helpful resource that I had was Howard Carter, who discovered the tomb of King Tutankhamun in 1923. He wrote a series of books about the discovery of the tomb and the processes that he used to preserve them. And he was really on the leading edge of what archaeologists were doing at that point. A lot of it was just treasure hunters. It was just like rich old British men like digging stuff up in their spare time. And there wasn't a lot of like scientific method to what they were doing. And so Howard Carter was kind of on the forefront as far as the approach that he took to preserving things. But he was also just a really good writer. Like he was really funny. He was really petty. Like he would have so many references to people that he thought were not up to snuff, and he would call them out in his books. And
Really?
yeah, he was real petty. So it made his, I read the first book that he came out. He came out with several more, but they came out after 1925. So I read his first one, and that helped me really understand a lot of what archaeology could and couldn't do in that time period, because archaeology in particular has really revolutionized beyond the 1920s from a technology standpoint. So it really helped give me like a pin in time for this was what cutting edge technology in archaeology looked like in the 1920s. But it just helped that he also was really easy to read.
Oh my gosh, now I want to go back and read.
It is worth it. I don't read a lot of historical texts. I can't do like Charles Dickens. That's too like wordy for me. His book was totally worth reading. It was really fascinating and not dry and boring like you would think it would be. And he's real petty.
My kind of book.
That's what I'd say.
I'm definitely going to do that. So the one process I was really like so interested in, and how Sam like preserved a book. Where did you, because when you described how she was, because there's a diary, how she was kind of finding out, separating the pages, that just, you described it beautifully. Like I could almost, really picture her doing it. And how did you research that? How did you?
I was very lucky that antique booksellers and rare booksellers are very online, and they're very good about sharing their craft. So I watched lots of videos of people doing basic repairs on books, and then I read a lot of the history of how book conservation came about and who was doing it at the time and what kind of technology they were using. But honestly, a lot of book conservation today is the same as it was in the 1920s. They use the same methodologies, and it's specifically because of the materials they're working with. They're always trying to do their best job to restore it, not just replace it. And so a lot of what they do, those techniques are the same because they're dealing with the same materials that Sam was dealing with in 1925. And so I was able to watch a lot of videos and read a lot of their blogs where they talk about conservation and what kind of methodologies they use. And I do this to myself all the time. I did it on Hood and I did it on Curse, where I was like, ooh, wouldn't it be cool if, not realizing that means that you also have to know how to do that. So I think at some point Sam was just working in the shop, and then it was like, oh, but what if she was also like a conservator, and that could come into play? And then I realized, oh, now you have to learn how to be a conservator.
Yes, but it's a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up becoming integral to the plot, but at the time I was like, come on, Jenny.
No, I'm telling you, I want to be there in your brain writing.
It's mostly just me yelling at myself. Why would you do that?
Oh my gosh. So you have a couple, one of my favorite characters, and I think is it Amos?
Yeah.
No, he is just, there are so really side little characters. Can you tell us, about a couple of them?
Yes, so Amos is part of, I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. There are several groups at play who are after this bowl for their own reasons. Some of them are evil, some of them are not evil, some of them seem evil and maybe aren't, some of them seem not evil and maybe are, but Amos belongs to one of those groups, and he ends up sort of pseudo befriending Sam, and he is a young Irishman, and he's just so cute. Like,
Yes, oh my God.
He's so earnest, but it's funny because Sam, the way I would describe Sam's character is that she's sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. She's very like, she's got, as scared as she is of the world, she's also just so hopeful, and she's so like, she can't help but want the best of things and for people and from people. She wants to think the best of people. She wants to hope that they can achieve the best in a situation. And so of her trio, of her and Bennett and Joanna, she's definitely like the most positive and optimistic and upbeat of them. And so it was fun to take somebody like Amos, who is, I would say he's like a golden retriever. Maybe like a
description.
squirrel. Like he's even more, like he makes Sam look cynical, which I did not think was possible. But I just think that particularly these kinds of stories, these adventure stories, you need that one character just for levity, especially when things start to get really dark and you're thinking, I don't know if they're going to be able to do this. I don't know if they're going to be able to get out of this. You need that one character who is just so naive that they're like, yeah, of course the world's not going to end. Like, what? That can't happen. That doesn't happen. Like, it's going to be fine, guys. Somebody's going to take care of it. Don't worry. Look at this beautiful architecture. So that's very
he
much.
Just was so good. He's just, he's just so fabulous. So I just had to ask. Well, now there's romance in this too.
Yes.
So did you intend for there to be a romance, or did you just, it just kind of came up?
Well, starting out, I knew that Sam had this childhood crush on Bennett because they live in this very small town, Clement, Illinois, and it's mostly a farming town. The only reason the Steelings live there is because their father owns a textile mill there. So he's kind of the wealthy benefactor of the whole town. But most of the rest of the town is farmers. They're a very small town. And Sam is really bright. She's very bookish. She loves knowledge and learning and, archaeology and treasure hunts and things like that. And that's not really something that the rest of her peers are into. And so I knew that the only person who was going to be worthy of Sam's distant yearning would be someone like Bennett, who also loves knowledge, and he's very reserved, I think is a kind way to say it. Yes. And so I knew that she would be interested in him. What I didn't know was whether or not that interest would be unrequited. And so I think I had to spend a lot of time with Bennett to know whether or not, honestly, to know whether or not he was worthy of Sam, because Sam's, she's a pretty great girl. She's got a lot going on for her. But also just to know if he would even be out of his own head enough to recognize, oh, you like me and maybe I like you too. And so it's a very, very slow burn, but it's a very slow burn, not because I was like, ooh, slow burn, but just because these two characters are so dense that it would take them the full length of a novel and the world potentially ending for either one of them to be like, I like you. So it was so satisfying for me, the whole how you did it, because I love romance in a book. So to let you know, I was completely satisfied with how everything went. It was lovely. So, oh, thank you. It's a very light touch, but I also always love romance in a book. I think even if I tried to write one without it, it would still worm its way, worm its way in. I adore romance novels. I adore historical romance novels. And so that was always going to be a factor. But because this is an adventure story at its heart, that's not the core of it. That's just something that sort of happens as they go along. So.
Yeah, just a little, an added benefit. So I want to get into, this is your sophomore effort, so how's it been? What's it like?
I feel like I should qualify that though by saying I've written 12 manuscripts. This is my second published book, but I think by the time I got to, Hood, from the first draft of Hood that I wrote to when it actually published was a decade. And so that was a decade of me really just learning how to write, how to be a writer, how to write. I wrote in multiple different genres, even just figuring out what genres is my voice good for, what genres am I interested in. And so I think I was lucky in that way. I didn't feel lucky at the time, but I was lucky in that way that I really learned how to write, not just how to write, but how to structure my time and how to structure my writing so that I can write sort of cleanly and I'm not just losing my mind on every single draft. And so that I think really paid dividends on Specter Queen and on its sequel that comes out next June that I don't think I can share the title of yet. They haven't officially told me and I don't want to get in trouble. Okay. But I can promise it is as epic as Curse of the Specter Queen. Yes. And I will be excited to share it. It's probably at this point one of my favorite things that I've written, even though it was very challenging to write it. But I think writing something like this, I really, really needed to know how to write. And that was what I learned all along. And so now I'm not as afraid of the story as I spent a long time just wondering, can I even finish a book? And now I know I can finish a book. Finish a draft. But now I know how much work goes into a book. And so I'm much more careful about not just chasing shiny new ideas down the rabbit hole because I know this isn't ready. And I think that's a really valuable thing that I've learned through publishing and through so many rounds of edits and seeing how much work it takes to take an idea to a published book. I now know that idea is not ready and it's okay for it to sit because there's always something I can be writing. Writer's block is not a problem for me. It's more which thing do I focus on now?
Well, then how did you focus on the Specter Queen?
Well, I think, so I had written Hood and sold it and it was a 1-book deal but my editor had, a first book option. And so I think I had sort of an identity crisis after I sold Hood, which was okay, now what do I do? Because, when you're writing and it's just you're just writing whatever you want, whatever you're interested in, whatever is compelling to you. But then once you publish, you do have to consider your audience. You have to consider that's not to say you can't just write whatever you want, but that if you're jumping genres or you're jumping age groups or you're jumping storytelling types every single time, all that work that you put into building the audience with one book, if I had gone and written a very gritty, first person murder mystery kind of story, that's not necessarily the same set of readers. So I did all that work to build this readership and now I've got to go do that work all over again. And so I really had to think about what story ideas do I have that would be a good complement to Hood, that are still those action adventure stories. They're driven by a cast of a crew of friends who are at the heart of it, and that there are lots of twists and turns to it, lots of cliffhangers. I love a good cliffhanger at the end of a chapter. And so I I had all these ideas and I had sent them. I wrote up like 5 or 6 ideas and I sent them to my agent. She was like, any of these sound good? Which one do you want to work on? And I was like, just kidding. I'm going to work on this thing over here instead that I didn't tell you anything about. And I'm going to labor away on it in secret. So I worked on Specter Queen for about 8 months. And then I sent the first 50 pages to my agent and I said, please just put me out of my misery. I have no idea if this is working or not. I have no idea if it's good. Just tell me to move on and I'll go work on something else. And she came back and said, no, I think this is really good. Let's take it to your editor. And so then it ended up, I genuinely just wanted her to tell me, like, this ain't it, Cap. And she came back and she was like, no, it's great. And then my editor was like, we love it. We want to buy it as a series. And then we ended up getting to sell, we sold some TV rights have been optioned for Curse of the Specter Queen. And I can't talk details yet because I got in trouble for that already. But I can say it's been optioned, it's in the works. I'm super excited about it. That was like a dream that I didn't even know I was allowed to dream. And so I'm
so excited. Oh my, because it was going to be one of my questions. Because that's all I could do was picture it the whole time.
I think it's
picturing you as Sam. I wish you would play. I'm sitting here. That's what I'm thinking.
I have the right here for it. She loves a good fun.
Oh my gosh, you have just made my day. Oh my God, I'm so excited. Oh my gosh.
I think it's no mistake that all of my comp titles were movies. My agent was like, let's talk about comp titles. I was like, well, The Mummy, Indiana Jones, National Treasure, Romancing the Stone. Those are all of my comp titles.
Oh my gosh. I think it's the perfect time because we're in for a treat because Jenny's going to actually read part of the book. So I'm dying. She did not tell me what scene she's reading, so I can't wait. So.
Okay. So as I said, when I was talking about the beginning of the book, this is, so it starts with Sam in the bookshop and she receives a mysterious package. And so this is when she's discovered the package in among her other normal books that she normally receives. And she's opened it and there's this book inside. The book was small, barely larger than her hand, the cover in such disrepair that Sam feared it would disintegrate if she so much as gave it a stern look. She had seen plenty of books in a variety of conditions since she started working at Steeling's Rare Antiquities, but this had to be the worst state of deterioration she'd ever witnessed. It looked as if the book had been buried in someone's back field and dug up by a stray goat. Who would do such a thing to you, she wondered, her chest aching at the violence the book had encountered on its journey. Well, whatever ills have befallen you, you're safe here now. There was nothing in the package to indicate where it had come from, no letter of provenance or introduction from a buyer explaining what the book was or why they had sent it. The mystery of it had her pulling out her tools, for the moment abandoning the other new arrivals. She took her brush and went to work, tilting it up to sweep softly along the outside edges, collecting a tidy pile of earth and sediment. Already she knew it would need a rest in the humidifier to loosen up the pages and hopefully restore the faded writing within. Once she had sufficiently cleaned the outside, she began her preliminary inspection of the interior. The pages were so waterlogged she could hardly pry them apart, but with the aid of a scalpel and a level of patience bordering on stubbornness, she managed to loosen one enough to pull it open. The writing was, as she suspected, faded and illegible in many places, but that wasn't what drew her attention to the book. It was the hasty sketch of a cat on the open page, the graphite strokes thick and dark and tearing through the paper in some places. She could even see smudges where the lead must have broken. Whoever drew this cat must have had very strong feelings about it. Except that, the longer she stared at the image, the less it actually looked like a cat, at least not like any ordinary house cat. The proportions were all wrong, the ears too sharp and pointed, almost like horns, the jaw too long and narrow, more fitted to a dog. And then there were the eyes. They were nothing more than blank page, but the longer she stared, the more they seemed to burn, two desolate holes radiating a promise of danger. Awareness prickled down her legs and across her arms, as if a wayward slip of icy January wind had found its way into the shop. But it wasn't the wind. It was the way the cat kept staring, even when she slid the book aside. The sightless eyes were on her, always on her, and in a fit of fear, she slammed the cover shut. Don't be such a fool, Sam muttered, though she made no attempt to open it again. It's only an old book. What's the harm? Turns out a lot.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, we do have a question. Do you have time? Do we have time for a question?
Absolutely.
So this is from Aliza, and she said, I love that Stephanie Garber's book blurb is featured on the cover. Yes. During the writing process, do you often chat with fellow authors to share ideas? And she's also, I'm so excited to read Curse of the Specter Queen. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for being here. I have a critique group actually that I belong to of other writers, and we have been critique partners for over a decade now, pretty much since before Hood. And so I never ever send anything to my agent or my editor until it's gone through them. And the one time I did, my editor was like, I don't know what's going on with this story. And I was like, it's because I didn't go through that. It's because I knew it and I was being impatient and I learned my lesson. And so I think it's really vital to find, if you're interested in being a writer, I think it's really vital to find someone's, but at least someone who can be your critique partner. Because the thing is, when you're writing, there will always be things that you miss. There will always be things that are not your strong suit. And what has been really crucial to me is that my critique partners are good at the things that I'm not. And so they catch it and they tell me. I've got one critique partner and she is so good at, she will always say, okay, but how are they feeling? Like, I understand that this really exciting, dramatic thing just happened, but how are they feeling about it? And I was like, we don't have time for feelings. She was like, well, you need to take the time. And she's always right. And I do always have to go back and process their emotional state in the moment. And so I think that that's always really vital for me. And because writing is such a I always talk about writing. Writing is like giving yourself a haircut in the dark with no mirror, you know? Like, you think you did a good job, but you have no idea until you turn on the light and ask somebody to look at the back. And so I think it's really important to stop and ask somebody to look at the back because otherwise it's just you kind of floating out in space, making things up. No idea if they're actually working or not.
I love it. So do you have, there were the three of them. Like, do you have, is there like a Joanna type in your life? Or are you the Joanna to someone else?
I'm definitely not. I like to think I would have been a Joanna given appropriate financial circumstances. I am sadly not the daughter of a textile baron and a former actress turned socialite. But I think that what I love about Joanna is that she just doesn't have a lot of the hangups that a lot of women do. She knows, I mean, she's got her own issues, but she knows that she knows who she is to a large extent. And she knows when something is worthy, and to her, Sam is worthy. And so she'll hold on to Sam no matter what. And so I think that those aspects of her, just that even when she is angry at Sam, that like unwavering loyalty to their friendship, that is something that I also have. But she'll tell you when you're being an idiot. That's also something that I have.
Does, yes. I love it.
Yeah, she's the bucket of cold water on your head when you need a wake-up call. And I will also do that.
So I also want to ask, I loved the fashion in the book. So how did you come up with the fashion? I mean, it's just great.
So most of what particularly Sam and Joanna wear, but even Bennett's outfits, are based on real outfits that I found from archives or from museums, and that were appropriate for the time. And then those are the outfits that they get to wear. And so that's actually a good point. I feel like at some point on social, I should share some of those outfits that show up in the book, because they are gorgeous.
Oh my gosh.
What a lot of people, what I didn't realize until I started researching was that flapper culture really didn't show up until like the late 1920s, like 1927, 28. And so the mid 1920s was really, really transitional. The early 1920s was still, everything was floor length, everything was long sleeved, everything was high neck. And so you don't really get to those, but in the 1925, their hemlines were still much longer than they were by the end of the decade. And we always tend to sort of truncate history. You know, we think of the 1920s as like a singular entity, but it wasn't. It was an entire decade. And we know from living through a decade how much things can change. And that was true for them too. And so that was a surprising thing that I learned when I was researching. But then I got to find these dresses that fit the time period, and were just really pretty. Every time I was like, oh, I just really want these dresses.
No, I was the same way. So as a final question, I love to ask, when people read the book, what do you want them to take away from it or feel? So here I'm asking you what you want people to feel.
Anytime someone reads one of my books, I want them to experience what the best books that I have read do for me, which is that I like exist in another world for a while, that it's so engrossing that I just disappear into it, you know? And so I think a friend of mine called them like portal books, where it's just like you go through a portal and you're in another world. And that's really what I want people to take away. I have this concept, this is why I love historical fiction. I have this concept that I call, oops, you learned something, which is what I feel like historical fiction is, which is that you're going along, you're reading this story, it's very exciting, fun things are happening, and then you're like, wait, did these things happen? Were these real things? Like, did you just trick me into learning something? And that was always my favorite thing. I read a lot of historical fiction when I was younger, and I still do now, but that was my favorite thing, was that I learned something, but not through like rote memorization. It was just through getting to experience the human part of human history. And so I do hope that all the like weird little tidbits of history and knowledge, like knowing about the RMS Olympic, knowing that the Titanic had a sister ship that was built in the exact same way with exact same features, which in hindsight was really eerie. But I hope that people will take that away too, that you can walk away and be like, actually, I know about some very specific locations in medieval Dublin now.
Well, I think people are then going to go like try to track them down. See, that's what I would do. I'd be reading my book and I would be, you know, okay, this is where we're going. Jenny, this book is amazing. And I love it. I can't wait for the second one to come out. I can't believe I have to wait a whole year to find out what happens, you know, with Samantha, what they're going to be up to next. And you are amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I think I'm going to keep up with you on Twitter, which is something that I don't do. I live pretty off the grid, but I'm telling you.
That's probably the better way to go, honestly.
No, I think I need, for my own well-being, I think I need to be in your brain just of the time. So you have just been amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you for giving us your time and your energy. And we just wish you the best of success. And you have to come back.
Absolutely.
For the next one. Or even
it will be in person
and do a fun thing. I would do it. You're just,
I would be happy to.
You're amazing. So thank you. And thank you everybody who came. You guys are spectacular. And anything else? Do you want to say anything as we close?
I think that we covered everything. If anyone would like more information on the books or my social or about me, they can go to my website, Jenny Elder Moke, MOKE.com. And then you can find my Twitter, where I'm just
I'll be on the Twitter, that I will be. All right, good night, everybody.